Thank you for joining us today for the Monte Vista Grove Weekly Convocation Hour. Today's scripture reading is from the New Revised Standard Version, Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Thanks be to God for the message of assurance. Let us pray together. God of grace and peace, grant us ears to listen, minds for reflection, hearts open to learn the experience of those you have created to walk with us in this life. May we be present for one another in times of sorrow and grief, as we are in times of joy and celebration. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. In January 1993, I was hired to teach anthropology at West Los Angeles College. At the time, we had the highest enrollment of Black students west of the Mississippi. Hearing a number of students in class tell of their experiences of driving while Black, I wanted to know and understand more than I did. I found an article published in 1989, written by Dr. Peggy McIntosh, titled Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege. This enlightening article became required reading every semester in my cultural anthropology courses, and always generated lively discussions that lasted well after class dismissal. Today, along with you, I have the privilege of meeting, not quite face-to-face, a longtime educational heroine of mine. Dr. Peggy McIntosh is the Senior Research Scientist and former Associate Director of the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College, Massachusetts. She founded the National SEED Project, an acronym for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, with the goal of creating conversational communities that drive change in curricula, teaching methods, and school climates. In her national and international speaking engagements, Dr. McIntosh shares how she came to see that she has advantages by being born white in a culture that favors whites. This acknowledgement stemmed from her autobiographical experience, the journey she will share with us today. Thank you, Dr. McIntosh, for this opportunity to meet you and to hear your story. Welcome.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone who has decided to. I'm going to use old-fashioned language here. Everybody who has decided to tune in. You recognize my radio background. I feel some affinity with Presbyterians. My grandparents, all four of them were Presbyterians, and some of them are buried in the South, in Sinking Spring Cemetery in Abingdon, Virginia. And in that cemetery, there's a road that divides the whites who were buried there and the enslaved people who were enslaved there in Abingdon, and the free Blacks as well. They're all buried on the other side of the road. So, Barbara, I'm happy to hear from you that my work was engaging to the students. And I think it's because I told my story of how I came to notice white skin privilege, which is quite different from an academic analysis. It was at the Wellesley Centers for Women in about the year 1982 or 3 that I discovered in a seminar I was leading, the men and the women were not getting along very well. The seminar was on bringing new materials on women into the liberal arts disciplines, all of them. And the men and the women were in great shape with each other at the beginning of each semester, each academic year that I ran the seminar for 7 years. But the friendliness, male and female, that we saw in September, October, November had kind of dissipated by March, April, and May. We were meeting monthly. People came from all campuses all over New England and also New York and New Jersey to come to discuss bringing materials on women into the liberal arts curriculum. Some of the men drove 5 hours to get to the seminar. And the men were unusually nice and very open-minded about this whole subject. But something happened each year so that by March, they didn't want to sit together with the women at the beautiful big dinner we always had in the middle of a 5-hour seminar. So I thought I needed to keep doing this. There was a huge waiting list, but I must confess to the Mellon Foundation, which was funding us, that I lacked something in my facilitation, and I created some kind of alienation between the men and the women. But if they would give me another $325,000, I would mend my ways. So I am writing along in my grant proposal, and I'm using previous notes. I was an assiduous note taker throughout the seminars. I found I hadn't done anything wrong, but the women had asked a question that the men answered in what they didn't realize, and we didn't realize, was an insulting tone. The question raised first in about 1982 was from a woman, professor. Everybody in the room was a professor, 22 professors. The question raised by that woman was, isn't it too late to be doing what you're recommending, which is a senior seminar, which is a feminist critique of your major, after you've already been in a womanless curriculum for 3 years? Isn't it too late? And a very nice man explained, no, it wasn't too late. The way he put it was, you're asking us to put women in at the beginning, and in those first year courses, it's too early. In the first year courses, you're laying the foundation blocks for knowledge. And if you're laying the foundation blocks for knowledge in those intro courses, you can't put in soft stuff. None of us said a word. Though he'd been reading, like all of us, many hardback books, many refereed journal articles on women, very scholarly, and he called it all soft. Later, I thought 2 things. One is, he doesn't understand labor pains. and second, do I know any mothers who are really soft? 2 years later, my notes showed a similar encounter and exchange in a seminar. A woman had said, we're putting women in too late. Women should come in right at the beginning. First-year students should have a balanced curriculum, gender-balanced curriculum. And another very nice man, in an explanatory way, said, that first year, the student is choosing their major. And if you want this, the student is choosing their discipline. And if you want to teach a student in a discipline, if you want a student to think in a disciplined way, that's the way he put it. If you want a student to think in a disciplined way about the discipline they're about to enter, you can't put in extras. Once again, neither the men nor the women responded to this man saying that women are extra. But in later days, I was thinking, he's born of a woman. What's been done to his mind to make him think she's extra? But come to think of us, all in the room, all of us in the room were born of a woman. All of us at Wellesley College are born of women. Everybody on the face of the earth is born of a woman. What has been done to this nice man's mind to make him think that putting women in the curriculum is putting in something extra? And I went back and forth thinking I had to choose between these two alternatives. Either these are very nice men or they are oppressive men. Those were the days when I thought it was either or. Then I remembered that I was educated at Harvard University, and what was done to my mind was to teach me, one of the silent ones in the seminar, on those questions. I was taught men have knowledge, men make more knowledge, men publish and profess knowledge as professors, and men run the main best known research universities and the best known university presses. And they have become convinced, as I was too, that men are knowers and knowledge is by male. And then I remembered that Black women in the Boston area, back around 1977, had written an essay from the Combahee River Collective. It looks as though it's pronounced Combahee, but it is pronounced Combahee in South Carolina. The Combahee River Collective had created a manifesto that said white women are oppressive to work with. I hated reading that. They didn't say it in so many words, but they implied it. And my first response was a kind of whine. I don't see how they can call us oppressive. I think we're nice. Kind of blanket statement about women, silly in retrospect, but this is where I was back in 1982. And then I had a second thought, which I had to stop and analyze, and I hated the fact that I had thought it. I especially think we're nice if we work with them. And I was mortified at how racist that actually is. I was expecting thanks for working with people I'd been taught to look down on. And I thought I deserved their thanks. How embarrassing. So I thought, I hope it didn't show. I hope I was so polite and so smart that they didn't notice my racist underlying assumption that I should be thanked for working with Black women. But after a couple of years, I thought, yeah, they did notice. Of course they noticed. They seem to have forgiven me in part because I was teaching Black women's literature, but never with a single idea having to do with how whites created the culture within which Blacks struggled. So I think they were gentle to me, gentle with me, but I was embarrassed by my own train of thought. And then I realized I had been taught a litany parallel to the ones I had been taught about men. And the litany was, white people have knowledge. White people make more knowledge. White people publish and profess knowledge as professors. And white people are in charge of the best known research universities and the best known university presses. And we have taken in, internalized, you would now say, the idea that knowledge is white and whites are knowers. And there were the 17 million volumes at Widener Library at Harvard and its affiliated libraries by men about people all over the world, but not really about women, and not books by women. So then I thought, that's terrible, because I had thought the reason my colleagues couldn't get any grants is they wrote bad proposals. Now I think I had the knowledge system on my side. In addition, every foundation, by then I'd gotten 17 foundation grants. Every time I had visited a foundation or heard from them, it was dealing with white people. Never saw any people of color in any foundation that funded me. So I thought, I don't like this at all. It isn't fair, but I've got the knowledge system and the money system on my side. And I asked, what else do I have that I didn't earn? And I didn't want the answer, but I felt, for reasons that are moral, I felt that I must find out what else I had beside the knowledge system and the money system working for me. Now, like many of you, I have dialogues with my own mind, but it refused to answer my question, what else do I have that I didn't earn? So I had to sleep on it. And I went to sleep one night practically shrieking, if I have anything I didn't earn, except the knowledge system and the money system working for me, show me. And in the middle of the night, up swam an example, and I turned on the light and I wrote it down, and I thought it was trivial. It was, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. In the morning, I looked at it again and I still thought it was trivial. Now I think it's huge. It keeps me from having to feel like the only or the lonely. And the next night, up swam another example. This one was about housing. The day I move into new housing that I've chosen, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors will be pleasant to me. And then night after night for 3 months, it's not my unconscious mind, my subconscious mind served me up with examples. Now, Barbara, have people in your group read White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack?
They will have a copy in their cubbies, probably either the end of today or by tomorrow.
Marvelous. In the reduced number of examples, reduced from the original 46 examples, is this list Barbara is giving you of 26. But you will recognize that some of them are quite important. One is being seen as an individual rather than a carrier of group values or standards. So I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer correspondence without having people attribute those choices to the bad morals of my race or the illiteracy of my race or the carelessness of my race. And I can be pretty sure that if I shop alone, I will not be tracked in a store on grounds that I might be shoplifting. And when a cop pulls me over, which they do because I speed, I can watch the mental process by which a white cop, decides that I'm just a little old white lady with her hair in a bun, and her papers are in order, and her voice is soft, and she's really not a danger on the road. But I really am a danger on the road. And it's my whiteness that is helping the cop to let me off. And it's the same train of thought in your state that fills the jails of California with Black and brown men. They're just not let off by they don't have white privilege. Well, one of my next to last of the 46 elements that I originally wrote about is, if my day or week or year is going badly, I don't have to ask of each negative episode whether it has racial overtones. My colleagues of color can't afford to be naive, and they'll be out of our institute in 5 years if they don't know which way the wind is blowing on everything negative that happens to them. So I'm given the mental relief of not having to worry all the time whether my whiteness is getting in the way of my being taken seriously, my being treated respectfully, my being promoted, my being paid. And the last one is, I can buy bandages in so-called flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. Once I wrote them all down, I saw I had a leisure and assets that I could use to spend down my bank account of white privilege. I came to see it as a bank account. I was given, I can't be blamed, shamed, or guilty for being born white in a culture that favors whites. But it gives me power and security. And so I can spend down the bank account. And it's been a revelation to me how wonderful it is to stop being mistrusted by people of color. How wonderful it is to be trusted, not hated and suspected. How wonderful it is to use my power to weaken the system that gave me that power, because it wasn't fair that I got so much. Now, of course, I didn't get male privilege, but that's another story. What I did is try to use white privilege I had to weaken the system of privilege that gave it to me. Then I began to see how many forms privilege takes, and I'm going to ask you to do by yourselves, just for a minute, what forms of disadvantage you've had in your life, and then for another minute, what forms of advantage you think you've had in your life. These could have to do with things beyond race. This disadvantage could have to do with your body type, your neighborhood, your parents' relation to formal education, your parents' relation to money. Could have to do with whether you're right or left-handed. Could have to do with the place in the birth order of your family. What set you back and what set you forward. After Lindsay has given you 1 minute on the disadvantage, then she will announce that we're ready for the second question, one or more ways in which you've had unearned advantage. Now, you might say you've had no advantage. Some people do say that. But as I say, the cops see you as white. Whether or not you have that white skin privilege, if you ever went to college and got a scholarship, you didn't create the scholarship program and give the money to fund it. It was there when you needed it. That's privilege. or if you've traveled internationally, which all of you have, virtually all of you have, you'll find you happen to be born here to a currency that stretches and buys a lot more overseas than here. Well, that's unearned advantage. And I would like, Lindsay, for you to now start to time us. One minute on a contemplation of some disadvantages you've had in your life, because everybody's had some. Nobody here is living on a bed of roses, and they may have intensified as you age. But in any case, please think for 1 minute about unearned disadvantage of any kind that you've had. And then Lindsay will bring us out of that minute with her announcement that we change topics.
Okay, 1 minute is up. So we'll start a second timer for the next question. Go ahead. Okay, that's the end of the second minute.
Thank you for showing this, Lindsay. One of my advantages as a woman was that I didn't have to go to war. My brother and all my male relatives had to worry about going to war and being killed or maimed. One female privilege was in the days when I grew up. I'm now 86, but when I grew up, it was a female advantage to not have to go to war. One of the things I have found for those who say I have no privilege, and Donald Trump was one of those who denied that white privilege exists. I say that, well, one white privilege is that your language, English, is spoken all over the world, and you will never be as lost in airports as a person who has no English. You may not be often lost, but English is a kind of lingua franca around the world. We didn't earn this, but we benefit if we are English speakers. That's another form of privilege. Just before he left office, Donald Trump got very exercised by the idea of white privilege and signed an executive order saying that nobody in the federal government could take any kind of training that use divisive concepts such as white privilege. As soon as Biden got into office, the very first day, he went to his office after the ceremony and he reversed that. However, he reversed that executive order, canceled it. However, there's still some amount of danger that comes if you're in a right-wing situation from raising the matter of white privilege. Why? The reason I think it's important is this. We have studied a great deal about the sufferings of people who have been oppressed. And those of you who are in missionary settings have seen a great deal of suffering in the places you've chosen to live and do your ministry. The thing we haven't studied is what it's like to be exempt from some of the worries, the struggles, the poverty, the bad reputations. We haven't really studied that much. I don't think white privilege is a divisive concept, but I think it's a new one, and people need to be allowed to get used to it without blame, shame, or guilt. We did not invent the systems that we were born into. So I'm glad that President Biden did take away the fact that it was that for some number of weeks in there illegal to give in a federal agency any training that included the idea of white privilege. Well, I was told in Minnesota, your list of your privileges is very depressing for us and people want to avoid this subject, and can't you give us something else that is more hopeful? And I slept on that, and the subconscious mind gave me the idea of the bank account of white privilege. I can spend it down, but because the society in general is still giving me the benefit of the doubt on just about everything, my bank account will keep refilling. I'm trusted by the society as a whole. And so even if I give away money, time, attention, publication possibilities, even if I give away some of the power that whiteness gives me, I'll get it back. I'll get it back. Then Minnesota got back to me another time, said, we have started anti-racist trainings. We only have 4,000 people in these trainings. We want 40,000 Minnesotans in our trainings. What can we do? Why don't we get 40,000 instead of 4,000? And I said, well, don't expect 40,000 because you're up against many major American myths that will keep people away from believing that white privilege exists. So don't ask for too much. You can't have 40,000, but you should know there are 5 key myths. The first is meritocracy, which has 2 parts to it. First, that the unit of society is the individual. And second, whatever you die with must be what you individually wanted and worked for and earned and deserved. That's the myth that your merit will result in the life you end up living. It's only partly true. Merit counts. All those nights of sitting up late to study for exams, they count. That effort counts. However, I did that. I stayed up all night before every exam, did very well, but I didn't have a paid job, a nighttime job. I was putting myself, my parents were putting me through college. My colleagues who had to work at night couldn't stay up all night. It's not their fault. The second big myth is the myth of manifest destiny. that God intended us to take over, or God intended in some other countries, white people to take over the management of other countries. And I worked for quite a while for the aging Governor General of the Philippines. And I know he felt that taking over the Philippines was a good thing to do, that the Filipinos benefited. Many Filipinos agree with that, but many don't. Anyway, colonialism is usually a matter of whites taking power from darker skinned people. And the myth of manifest destiny is we were destined to do this. The third thing that's a major myth is the myth of monoculture, which is that it's one big country with one set of values and standards and possibilities. And if you're not doing well in it, that's your fault. You're the problem. That's the myth of monoculture, when in fact we have many, many, as you know, in California particularly, many, many subcultures, many, many cultural groups that say that it's not a melting pot and maybe it's not a salad bowl, but we are plural. We are a plural culture, multicultural. The other two myths that are hard to get past if you're going to try to do thinking of this kind include the myth of white managerial and moral, I think I have to use the word moral, the myth of white managerial and moral superiority. And I know I grew up thinking that the reason the Blacks in my community didn't do well is that they just weren't, they were inferior people. And that would account for the fact that we whites got the best grades, got onto the teams, were elected to office. I thought all the principals were white all over the state of New Jersey because we were so good at it. I thought we had authority because we were so good at managing. But now I've changed to the point where I think the management of affairs in the world is not necessarily being handled by those who are best and best at administration. So that's all very upsetting to have some of your myths overturned, but that's the way it was for me. I think I left out a myth and I can't remember which one I've left out. Anyway, they have quite a grip on our consciousness. Therefore, the idea that there's a big system that's unfair is hard to accept. It's hard to accept. I owe you that myth. Oh yeah, here it is. It's that whites don't have a race. White racelessness. It's what I felt growing up. I was just normal. I was a normal person. A Black girl in my 7th grade class, she was abnormal, but I was normal. I was the norm. And the idea in those days, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, was that the word race referred to other people. Now I have to say, no, we're all in it together. We all have ethnic and skin color and cultural differences and identities, and they do matter, and they can be very supportive of us, what we were given, whatever it is. But to say that race is only about other people is now, I think, obsolete. Okay, thank you for doing the exercise on your own advantage and disadvantage. As you know, I think everybody has some of each. Nobody got here scot-free, and nobody's living on a bed of roses. But being aware of what we have in the way of advantage and disadvantage that isn't of our making can just give us more of the humanity. That your life as religious people calls for, and mine does too. I was raised by Quakers and sent to Quaker school. Who would like to, Lindsay, will you modify the questions and read some aloud?
Absolutely.
Do whatever you want.
Okay, so let's see. Hugh Christopher says, what do you think about FAIR, the Federation Against Intolerance and Racism?
Oh, I don't know of it, but I love the name.
Wendy says, that's the best sign that we've progressed this year. For the first time, I can talk about white culture and people don't look confused.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that. And I would say, to quite an extent, it's true in the East Coast too. We even have students asking for courses that involve whiteness.
We have another one in the chat. Peggy, she says, when we come to understand white privilege, what are some ways that we can spend down our bank in ways that lead to a more just society?
Well, today I was visited by a Black woman who wants to know whether I would make an audio tape for her, with her. I said yes. I'm much too busy to take this on, but I said yes. Why? Because she's a Black woman who would like to do a collaborative thing, make a CD that people could play in their cars as they're driving. It wasn't completely formed as a request, not how to organize it, how to produce these CDs. I said yes, because I have the power to reach more people than she does here in Massachusetts. That's an example. We give money often when we could, let's say we don't go out for meals. Why? Well, partly because we make donations. A meal in this part of the world can, even at an inexpensive restaurant, can cost you $50. We put that money into the many causes that are, in my case, race related, that we give to. Attention. I haven't read all of James Baldwin. I mean to. It's part of my white leisure that I have time to read James Baldwin. I owe it to myself and to Baldwin and to the whole world of whiteness studies to read everything now. Then respect. I write a lot of letters to the newspaper, not under my own name. I write to appreciate the writings that others have sent into the paper. So I shouldn't say I write a lot of letters to the paper. It's to people who have had the courage to write to the Boston Globe. If I really like their letter, then I will write to them personally. I've made friends this way, actually. So many people put a letter out there and they don't know if anybody's seen it. So I say, I really appreciate your letter this morning. And so why can I do that? Why do I do that? I'm white. I have the power that goes with that. And the people writing the letters are very often people of color. And my email address has Wellesley College in it, and the Wellesley has a good reputation. So that little boost to their self-confidence is what I do, what I give.
Peggy, with your perspective on the sweep of your lifetime, do you see signs of hopefulness or progress?
Right now, I'm very discouraged. It seems to me many people in the United States have been hypnotized into believing a lot of nonsense, and like QAnon. And I'm wondering, what did we as educators do to create such a gullible population? So taking the Boston Globe every day, I open it, I try to open it to the Sudoku puzzle so I can avoid the front page. And so I'll guiltily do the Sudoku when I should be filling my mind with more of the negative stuff in the world. The great thing about puzzles, we do the Sunday Times too, my husband and I, the spelling bee and the crossword. The puzzle maker isn't trying to slay you. The puzzle maker wants you to get the puzzle, even if you have to work for the answers. But it's a very cooperative feeling that the puzzle maker is not out to get you. They want, because they'll lose their job if nobody can do the puzzles. So I evade much of the news now in order to keep my energy for people like the Black woman who wants to make a CD with me. And our little town in Massachusetts is named Tyringham. It's near Lenox in Pittsfield. It has a committee called Tyringham for Social Justice. They asked me to give a talk. I said, well, one way I use my privilege is to share the time and the publicity, and if there's a fee, the money with a person of color. So they said, well, who would you like to co-present? So I told them of a Black woman, very active in the town of Great Barrington. And she started a big organization called Multicultural Bridge, which they didn't know about. And she and I will co-present together on June 19th. That pleases me very much. Her good work will be brought to a much bigger audience, and Tyringham for Social Justice will feel it's worth doing this, and that they're not going to be blamed, shamed, or guilty about being born white. So that encourages me. And all day long, there are opportunities to use what power I have as a woman or as a white person. All day long, there are opportunities. I write about 2 letters a day throughout the year. It's 750 old style communications, pen and pencil, beautiful cards. If any of you would like some beautiful cards of, for example, quilts, I have a great collection and can send it to Lindsay and Barbara. And you can have free cards. Of course, postage does cost 55 cents. Still, I like sending cards, and I do a great deal of it. It helps our morale. Those of us who write often think it helps our morale that while these horrible things are happening in the country, we don't have to assume that we're being touched. No, I don't know how to put this. We don't need to assume that our humanity will disappear.
Peggy, we have a couple more in the chat. We have 3 at this point. Do you think the pandemic has contributed to a different perspective for better or worse?
Yes, I do. It was shocking to see how anti-scientific many Americans are, but it was good to see how many public officials especially became aware of these gross disparities in the lives of people of color and whites.
Okay. Next one says, you've mentioned the fear of being shamed. Is that a major stumbling block for white people facing white privilege?
Yes, the shame is irrational, but because we are not taught in the US to think systemically, but rather we are taught to think personally, many white people hearing about the reality of white privilege do feel ashamed. But let me repeat, the reason I think that is irrational is that we didn't invent the systems we were born into. It's just very difficult for white people to see systems at work when schooling didn't teach us to think in terms of systems. And in Europe, they have the example of Marx. He taught all the time in systems of caste. In general, in the United States, K through 12 teachers don't really touch they don't touch the subject of power, and they don't touch the idea of systems that are built in, systems like grading. That we don't teach the children to look at systems, and therefore they tend to take personally the fact when they've discovered they have white privilege. I feel sorry. It's not their fault. They do have power. It's hard to believe that in rural Massachusetts, by the way, where almost everybody's white. It's easier in California to see what a difference can be made by humane white people choosing to spend down their bank accounts of white privilege in sensitive ways that make life easier for others.
All right, Peggy, you seem to be a woman ahead of the times. Somehow your head and heart were open to seeing the world differently before the rest of us. To what do you attribute your willingness or ability to swim against the tide?
I have to thank Quakerism, which taught us there is that of God in every person and helped me to believe in my own thoughts. I also had a university teacher who taught very close reading of poems, very, very close reading, so that by the time you were finished one of Reuben Brower's courses at Harvard on a certain body of poetry, you perforce memorized it. Well, I began to read between the lines of poems. That allowed me to read between the lines of this culture. And what with Quakerism saying there is that of God in every person, and Reuben Brower saying trust your own thoughts, it's what I would say to all of you. The sacred center in any of you is the trustable soul. It's very interesting. Emerson and Thoreau and their colleague, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and also the poet Walt Whitman, they all urged us to trust ourselves. But in the case of Emerson, Thoreau, and Oliver Wendell Holmes, they also all believed in something they called the oversoul, which encircled us all. That was a kind of shared universal soul. Some of that rubbed off on me. So though while I was writing the white privilege work out of my subconscious, I felt crazy. Some days crazy. I think that it's those American traditions of combining self-respect, or what Emerson called self-reliance, with a sense that we are all connected, which was conveyed by the oversoul. To those things, I attribute my willingness to write what I've written. And the same voice that woke me for example after example after example also woke me when I got to the 46th one and said, Peggy, you must publish this. This is probably the most important thing you'll do in your life. And it has turned out to be so. By the way, when I took the first draft of my paper with the 46 examples to my institution's working papers committee, composed of Ph.D. women from all the social sciences, they turned it down. They said, we can't publish this. It doesn't have any footnotes. It doesn't have any footnotes. So I was charging royalties for people to copy it. It was being used all over the country in psychology courses, sociology, anthropology, American studies, Black studies, women's studies, education. And I made $20,000 the first year selling copyright permission for just the knapsack article at 50 cents per copy that you make for your classes. So then I went to the Working Papers Committee a year later and said, I'm making money off this. If you will publish it for our whole institution and call it a working paper of the Wellesley Centers for Women, you can make a lot of money. You can charge $6 for the paper. And they said, well, we'll take another look at it. And then they turned it down again. They said, we're sorry, this is a center for research and you on women. And we have to be careful because of the critics who think that women can't do research on themselves. And we have a reputation to uphold for good scholarly work. And this is not scholarly work. This is merely anecdotal, merely anecdotal. So I said, and it doesn't have footnotes. So I said, I understand. I really do think we have to be careful to be seen as serious scholars. But the same voice that gave me almost all of those examples woke me again about 3 months after the final turn, the second turn down, second rejection. And that voice said, in very authoritatively said, Freud didn't have footnotes. They approved because Freud didn't have footnotes. In other words, this was original work.
Peggy, can we squeeze in two last questions? We're at time, but I want to get these here. Oh shoot, we have 3 now. Okay. Let's see, there is so much fear out there. Anyone who sees the world as a zero-sum game believes that if they give up power, they will lose or even be erased. Any thoughts about how to calm that fear?
There's so much reason to fear out there, and I share it, but I do believe if we make decisions that don't have to do with the zero-sum game thinking, we will survive. Zero-sum game thinking says, if you win, somebody else loses. I think we need more lateral thinking that isn't about winning or losing, but working for the decent survival of all of us. And in my book, you will see phase theory and phase 5 of 5 phases of thinking. Phase 5 is the phase of working for the decent survival of all, because therein lies our own best chance for survival.
Okay, our last one is, what happens in the intersection of ethnicity and class?
It's very interesting to study. I don't know what the questioner says, means by the question.
I've been trying to understand the attraction of Donald Trump. And one of the things that keeps coming up is the fear and desperation of poor whites. And that seems to be a universal problem in the United States. And it isn't just about race, but it's also about them not feeling like they have a chance.
Yes, they're fed all 5 of the myths, and they're blamed if they are not making what the white world calls a success of their lives. So they're seen as under the myth of meritocracy, and the myth of monoculture. They're the ones that fall. They need to shape up and do it the white way, the rich people's way. So it's a real disease thinking that whites have set a good example for everybody else. That's a disease. But I was certainly raised with it. The Quakers didn't agree with it, but certainly in my town, those who became richest, they were all white. households run by men, very proud of what they had accomplished. And it's poison, really, in the culture not to work for the decent survival of everybody. Thank goodness when I was little, FDR came with the New Deal, trying to put a floor under everyone's welfare. And my aunt was a labor economist, and my uncle was a labor economist also, and he was on FDR's board of economic advisors, council of economic advisors. So my family had those lateral values that I think we need in the whole country. And my aunt, who was white, was the best friend of Pauli Murray, the Black woman who was a strong freedom fighter and intellectual. And now I'm happy to say one of the Yale houses is Pauli Murray House. And it's named after her because the slaveholding white male from previous generations had been the namesake of that house before. And they decided they needed a woman on one of the Yale houses, and they would choose Pauli Murray. And so that brings me very close to the feeling that my aunt and my uncle, in their New Deal theory and action, were doing valid work for all of us, and I would like to see it back.
Peggy, you are a treasure. Thank you for contributing richly to our ongoing conversation here at the Grove. That was a comment from one of our diversity task force leaders here. We have 3 amens to it in the chat and an invitation to have you back again. You've been a delight. Thank you so much. Barbara, would you like to see us out?
Thank you so much, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, for sharing your personal experience of discovering your own white privilege and how that privilege is woven into the structural fabric of society. This has been a timely and essential message you've brought to us today. As a white woman with unearned advantage, I've been largely unaware of the multiple experiences my privilege has shielded me from. And your writings have really opened my eyes. And on behalf of our diversity task force, specifically those that helped with this program today, Sandra Mader, Catherine Hughes, Hugh Christopher, and Lynn Cheney. We invite you to take the questions that we have here in front of us and ponder them and act on them. And I think the last sentence here, when Dr. McIntosh is asked, what can I do about inequity in our society? She replies, I use unearned advantage to weaken systems of unearned advantage. And we salute you for that. Thank you so much, Dr. Peggy McIntosh.
Thank you. Barbara, I wish I had been one of your students.
I am proud to be one of yours. Thank you. I want to invite you to join us next week to learn of the goals and vision of the Presbyterian Board of Pensions. Frank Spencer, who is the president of the Board of Pensions, will speak with us next Thursday. And thank you all for attending, and bless you, Peggy, for being here today.
Thank you so much.